Okay, so medium on the lightness. In my last video I was mentioning I was going to play something kind of light. Well, I had been reading the rules to this. This is 30 Years War by GMT. This is a game that when I first saw a mention of it, I said, you know, I want this. This might be the 30 Years War game. I don't know if it is or not. It's certainly lighter than, you know, maybe what my greatest aspiration is, which would be something that went into significantly more detail than, say, Europa Universalis on the 30 Years War in particular. Probably a multiplayer game because there were so many diplomatic aspects at play in the 30 Years War. This is not. This is a two-player game. As you can see, it's got point-to-point movement, which probably means it's fairly simplistic. The rules run 30 pages, a little less than that, 24. So it starts to feel like it's going to be kind of your standard CDG type style game. However, maybe I'm just being hopeful here, but it looks like it has a great deal more flavor than some of the CDG style games. And I'm really kind of looking forward to it. I don't think it's got the kind of subtle gameplay that a lot of people who are into the CDGs are going to be really into. But maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. We'll see. Again, this is a first look. I've skimmed the rules over the last week and kind of skimmed them again. I'm not absolutely strong on them. I usually am not. So that'll be no great shock here. But I'll try to get through without making too many mistakes. Comes with a couple of play aids, one of which contains a very useful sequence of play. Excellent. Well, let's go over what the victory conditions are here, because I think that's a good place to start with the end. So, there's automatic victory possibilities, which come if the Catholic, so they make two players, the Catholic and Protestant. That's kind of a misnomer because France, for example, is very strongly Catholic, even though they're in the Protestant camp in this game. Which is to say, I think it should probably be better described as Habsburg and anti-Habsburg, or Habsburg and freedom lovers, or whatever you want to call them. So, but we'll stick with their terminology even so. The Catholic player, who's of course the Habsburgs, needs to get the victory point total up to 50 points, and it starts the game at 21. That would indicate a total control of the old Holy Roman Empire, probably more than the strength that some of the medieval great kings like Barbarossa exhibited in terms of control over the empire. But that's okay, because to make Germany as a whole into a nation state like France or England or Spain had become would require that. And it would really make the Habsburgs, in that case, the dominant power by so much in Europe. This is a period where they're already dominant in their dual role as Spain and Austria. But this would make the family really, really tremendously powerful. Especially the Austrian branch. And the Protestants win, or the anti-Habsburgs, by getting the victory points value down to 0, which would basically be the dissolution of any power outside of Austria, I would assume. Neither one really occurred. The game can also end by the Protestants owning Munich, Vienna, and Brussels at the end of a turn. Well, this is important because Vienna is Austria. That's their capital. Munich is Bavaria's capital, and Bavaria ended up being a very, very strong pro-Habsburg force throughout most of the 30 Years' War, even though the king had some strong misgivings towards aligning himself so closely towards the Habsburgs, and at periods in this scenario, became somewhat disillusioned and tried to distance himself a little bit. But at the very beginning, he's strongly in the pro-Catholic camp, and in that sense is serving the Habsburg cause. And then finally, Brussels is the capital or a center of the Spanish Netherlands, and it would indicate that the Spanish Netherlands was largely destroyed, which would also be a very important blow against Habsburg dominance. Take all three out, and any Habsburg pretensions in Germany would be gone. There's one more, which is Wallenstein. If Wallenstein is allowed to achieve an influence of at least 20, the game ends in a Protestant victory. Now, that wouldn't really be a Protestant victory, but it would definitely be a serious blow to the Habsburgs. Wallenstein, nobody's really quite sure what he was up to. In fact, at the beginning of the game and at the early stages of the war, he seemed like a very loyal, pro-Catholic, pro-Habsburg leader, but also pro-himself. He was certainly gaining wealth beyond reasonable levels with his successes, and he was forming a very powerful army. And the Habsburgs believed that he was a threat to their regime, that he might try a coup or something along those lines. And eventually, well, first had him dismissed, and then eventually brought him back, and then had him murdered. Now, interestingly enough, I believe he was afflicted with syphilis, and some of his erratic behavior may have been more guided by that than perhaps by any reasonable ability to challenge the Habsburgs. However, his behavior was very suspicious and convinced the Habsburgs to get rid of him. So another way the game can end, possibly, which is through peace negotiations. And we'll get to that a little bit, but, well, we'll get to it now. Why not? Basically, a player, under certain circumstances, and we don't really need to go into the specifics here, but basically if you have a certain victory point level, you can make an offer by a free action of a peace. And then your opponent either must or may accept that peace, and it gives a certain lesser victory condition than perhaps would be normally acceptable. And you can also be offering a lesser victory to your opponent, it looks like, by the chart. And they have the option to take that or to try to press on. And then finally, there's the possibility at the end of turn 15. The turn track only goes to 14. And at that point, there are specific victory points based on the track. So, for example, the Catholics win if they get 30 or higher, and they control Austria, Bavaria, and the Spanish Netherlands. So there's two kinds of control here. There's control of the cities, which is marked in little circles or fortified markers. You'll notice the gray cities, those are independent cities. They're not really part of the area. And then there's control of the region itself. We have the victory point value that the region provides, and that's also provided by the minor, or by the independent cities. And I don't know what the other number is. Spaces necessary to control. If you control a certain number of spaces in that area, you get control of the area. So, for example, Austria takes 6 spaces to control. The little roosters are a sign of Protestant control. The papal insignia is the sign of Catholic control. Alright, well, let's look at the sequence of play, kind of briefly. Again, I don't know the rules well enough to really go through a detail here. We'll catch a little bit of that during play, I think. So first there's the Wallenstein phase, where the Catholic has the option to dismiss Wallenstein. He also can have the option to bring him back, I believe, or assassinate him. Pillage recovery. You roll a die, and I think we use 10-siders in this, divide it by 2, and that's the number of areas that you control that you can reduce the pillage markers on. Card draw phase. Well, everybody draws 7 cards into their hand, and the deck in this is a CDG, and it's a pretty standard one. You got your ops points, you got your events, you got a few other things though. Most notably, you have aid points. Those are important because that's the financial aid that you can get to go to help pay for your troops. Your troops can't be paid any way other than through aid points that are generated in a given turn. Those aid points go away if you don't use them. You can only play 1 aid point card per turn. So immediately you start saying, wow, I'm not going to have a lot of money for my troops. What a shame, especially for the peasantry, because troops that aren't paid and aren't in a place that pays them automatically. So for example, Spanish troops in the Spanish Netherlands are paid for automatically as long as they're not under siege. If you're not paid for, though, your troops start looting. And that puts these little looted markers on, which go up to 2. If they can't loot as much as they like, or if they get a very bad roll on the loot table, they take step losses as well. Step losses in this game can't be regained. You take losses, well, if you lose the entire unit, you can rebuild it. That's about the best you can go. All right. And then you go to the action phase where you play the cards in 6 rounds, the Protestant playing first. Now there's a number of different things you can do with your cards. You can use the operations points to activate a leader. And that leader, I don't know what it's actually called in this, has an activation rating. Hey, that's a much better name than in most. They also have a battle rating, which is going to be a roll modifier to the die roll. They have a leadership rating, which is how many troops they can command. So when you activate them, they can only take that many troops with them, sort of. Basically, you can take a stack of 8 combat troops with you, as long as you have enough leaders to command those 8 troops. And then there's a star, which indicates a dynamic leader. They have certain advantages, and they also will always be in command. And then we have the loss rating, which I have no real idea what that does. It may be some sort of penalty you take when you take a loss. I'm not absolutely sure. Well, I'm more than not absolutely sure. Like I said, I have no clue. There's no glossary in this one. Is there? Oh, wait. There's a card manifest. Not terribly useful to me. No, I don't see a glossary, and I don't see an index. Both negative effects to it, but the rules are fairly short. Unfortunately, I just don't know this one. They didn't strike me as terribly difficult to understand. Alright, well, we'll ignore that and maybe I'll be able to figure it out at some point. Oh, leader loss. Yep. Okay, so you roll a die. If you roll equal to or greater than the leader loss, you take a death to that leader. So yeah, in every battle, if you take losses, you may lose leaders. And that's reasonable. The leaders in the 30 Years' War took tremendous casualties. One thing about the leaders, if you look at them, on the back they often have a named leader. What's interesting about this is some of those named leaders exist on another counter. If somebody gets promoted by being flipped on one counter, and promoted is kind of weird, they get shifted to that army. It doesn't necessarily mean they're in a better place or whatever, but generally it's a good leader gets replaced with one who was lesser. And they have a counter somewhere else. You have to flip that other counter as well. Some of them have generic replacements on the back, or named leaders who aren't present on the board, which means that there's a bit of tracking and some pain, I assume, in keeping the right leaders in play at any given time. That's something that kind of worries me a bit. Okay, so did we go over the actions? I doubt it. We went over one, activating the leader. Another is to recruit. If you want to recruit, you roll on the recruiting table. And there's modifiers here based on the type of leader. A dynamic leader is better at recruiting. Pillaged areas are harder to recruit. Wallenstein is especially good at recruiting. And you have an option before you roll. Are you recruiting mercenaries or militia? And in some cases, different countries' leaders can only recruit in certain areas. That's all covered in a manifest back here of all the countries. And they have some special rules, as well as their supply base, which you have to keep in mind and take under consideration as you're playing. Special rules include where they can recruit and where they can't. Now, what else? Well, let's see. You can also collect foreign aid points. If you play the card, do you get them all? Yeah, you get the total number of foreign aid points from countries that give foreign aid. Remember, you can only play one of these in an entire turn, and this is all the money you have to pay your troops. Foreign aid is marked by these markers to indicate who can and can't give foreign aid. At the beginning of the campaign, the French cannot. The United Provinces, the English, the Spanish, and the Pope can. I believe the Swedes can as well. I don't know how many cards they have that give it. And each card seems to have some value on it. And you have to make your decision. Do you want to use a card for, its operations points for its event? That's the final thing you can use it for. Or do you want to use it for your foreign aid? Do you want to recruit? When you play a strategy card, that's how many leaders are allowed to make recruitment die rolls, the operations points. A high ops point allows you to move a harder to move leader, but it probably also has other advantages in terms of the value of the event, in terms of the value of the foreign aid, and in terms of how much you could recruit with it. It's an interesting mechanism, similar to other CDGs. I haven't seen it exactly in this way. As with all CDGs, it seems like they each have their own little take on the core mechanism, which may or may not be a problem. For me, it sometimes really is. Okay, the pay phase, you pay your units with foreign aid points. Some of them, like I said, are going to get paid off just by being in the proper place. But if you're campaigning, you're not in the proper place. Like if you're out in someone else's territory, you are most assuredly not in the right place. In which case you have to pay them money. If you don't pay them money, they loot. Bad things could happen to them. Bad things will happen to the peasantry. It's possible in a siege situation for both sides to be rolling on the same table, and they roll simultaneously. Their effects are the maximum effect to the peasantry, which means if both people get a 1 looting, it's only a 1 looting. If one gets a 2, it's a 2. Then we go to the end phase, and you get a free siege in the end phase if you're already in a siege situation. In a siege situation in this game, I think it's kind of cute. They cover not only what you need to siege a city, and that's the fortress strength. You have to have at least the fortress strength plus any strength that's present as a garrison in order to actually siege a fortress. But you can be in a fortress space without sieging it and mask the fortress, which means that the person inside has to come out and fight you. They can't just move. I think that's a nice touch on something with the point-to-point system especially. Okay. And then there's the Peasant Revolt segment, and I have no idea what this is. There's probably a table for it. No! Let's see. I don't know how these happen. Event cards. Okay. I don't know why it needs its own segment. Ah, they spread. So if revolts have happened, there's a possibility that they spread, but they cannot spread outside the outside the area that they're in. So once an area is filled with revolt, it won't spill out into other territories. And then we go to the end of turn phase, where you can voluntarily discard cards left in hand, and you can keep up to one of those. Turn marker goes forward, and we continue playing. Sounds reasonable. We haven't gone into the details of combat, but that looks pretty simple. A strength we have on the particular combat counters. We have a combat factor, a loss factor, which is, I assume, how much damage it takes to flip a unit, and a movement factor. A stack will move the speed of its slowest unit. Let's see if we can see something about combat here very briefly. Yeah, you cannot exceed the loss number, but you must try to come as close to the exact number as possible. Now, one thing in the game is there's different kinds of units. We've already mentioned there's militia and mercenaries. If you look, they have kind of different colors, blue versus black background. There's also veteran units. Veteran units, I assume, only come as a result of card play. There doesn't seem to be any way to improve militia into better units. There might be cards which allow you to do that, though. So I don't know. As usual, I haven't looked at the cards, and I don't want to do that. I want to be surprised by them. About the cards, you'll see these are marked with early war on them. Each player has their own deck in this game. What that means is, obviously, there are other sets. And once the victory point totals go to a certain point, we go to the intervention level. And then beyond, when the French intervene, I believe, we go to the apocalypse level. That sounds kind of scary. So, intervention goes in once victory points hit 30 or on turn 7. And then, as we said, when the French enter, we go to the apocalypse level. What else do we have here? Scenario setup stuff. More scenario setup stuff. I probably don't need that. Here's the peace negotiations chart. If you accept a peace negotiation, which we discussed a little earlier, you then roll on a table. And it could just end up being a truce. It could end up, I believe, being nothing. No, it's at least a truce or a withdrawal from certain areas. It could also be a minor victory. You can't get a major victory off the truce table, however. Oh, I forgot to mention this. When moving, if you're moving a stack of 3 or more units, you have to pillage areas as you move. This can be even an area that you're fighting in, but you must do some pillaging no matter what if you're taking an active part in the game. special rules for all the different nations are spelled out on the chart. And then some results here. Most of the charts are over here on the board. Get some holding armies. I guess those are just to take a big stack into. What else? These activation markers, I'm not quite sure what they're all about. Strike me as a way to mark who's going more than anything. The United Provinces, I forgot to mention them. One of the things that happens in play, due to the card play to some extent, is that, and also to moving Spinola's army into the United Provinces, is that the Dutch civil revolt is prosecuted a little bit more than it had been. There had been a truce going on. So, handled somewhat abstractly, just like some other aspects of the game, like the Polish-Swedish War and the Polish-Danish War, you can progress on there, and if you get it far enough, you've ended the Dutch revolt in one sense or another. Either the Dutch concede certain rights to the Spaniards in lieu of a truce for enough years to take over the rest of the game, or the Spanish concede the fact that the Dutch are allowed to continue giving aid against the Habsburgs. Got a lot of markers: current pope, status of some territories. Here are the electorates. Those have a specific status for them. They're worth victory points. Alright, I'm going to send this up. I hope you get a little bit of an idea from this. Again, I don't expect to give a real good strong view because I don't have one.